So I will start with the usual question. Is A Plague Tale: Innocence worth playing in 2024? The answer is both yes and no, and I don't think it being roughly 5 years old is even really a part of that conversation. I will just go ahead and say at the top of the video that I did not enjoy A Plague Tale: Innocence overall. I liked aspects of it, and I did complete the game, but I spent the first half of the game waiting to see if it got any better, and then the last half of the game begrudgingly finishing the game because I was so far in. That said, I think the question of if you should play it and if it really belongs on your backlog really depends on your tastes. So I'm going to try to explain what didn't click for me and why I think things may be different for someone else. A Plague Tale takes place in France in the 1300s during a fictionalized version of the Inquisition in France, unless you know something about rats that I don't. You play as Amicia, who, after a series of unfortunate events, finds herself thrust into a position where she has to keep herself and her little brother she barely knows from being murdered by, well, just about everyone. From a visual standpoint, A Plague Tale is absolutely beautiful for the most part. There are definitely some texture issues throughout the game, at least in some areas, and the rats in the game have some jankiness to them that, although the spectacle remains impressive, it can be a little rough in spots. I'm usually not someone who really pays much attention to graphics, but there were several moments that I stopped and admired particular scenes or areas, and I think you would have a hard time finding too many people that didn't agree. What is a bit more controversial is the gameplay. I was very aware that people were divided on this even before I dove into the game, and after playing it, I unfortunately fall into the camp that really didn't enjoy the gameplay here. A Plague Tale is mostly a third-person stealth game with some puzzles throughout. You primarily control Amicia as she navigates fairly linear levels with one or more companions. You have a sling that's capable of dispatching some enemies, but your use of it will be somewhat limited early on. As you progress, you will get new types of ammo and throwable objects which can be used to do things like force enemies to remove their helmets. By removing the helmet, you do expose their head from a stone from your sling. Other ammo will do things like help scare away rats, and there's several other types that I'm going to try not to spoil here. Essentially, these different ammo types will really be the only thing that changes in combat from the moment you start the game to the moment you finish the game. The last mission excluded because, well, reasons I don't really want to spoil. I found the stealth to be somewhat finicky and kind of full of trial and error, at least early on. It wasn't super intuitive when a guard would or wouldn't see you, like what the distance was, or what was really going to get their attention. It also wasn't clear when you were going to distract them. Were they going to immediately turn around and come back, or were they going to pause there for a little bit? All of these things, being somewhat inconsistent and not obvious, did make it a little difficult early on to figure out what was or wasn't going to work. Again, this bothered me and may not bother others. Later, while there were more options, more often than not, the most straightforward solution was to just eliminate all of the guards in your path. I enjoy stealth in games, but I really didn't enjoy it here. I enjoy stealth when it feels like there's a puzzle to solve. I enjoy setting up traps, finding the right moment to take out a guard before a patrol comes back, or creating satisfying distractions that cause multiple guards to go running, allowing me to slip through. Or maybe I just impersonate one of those guards and slip through. Maybe I turn a turret against a bunch of guards in an area. Or I sneak into a room and poison someone's drink. Or maybe I just hide in a hallway with a box on my head. Either way, what is here is far more simple, and I never really felt like I was solving a satisfying puzzle. It felt like there was typically one answer with only mild variation, and when you failed, it essentially is always just a game over, at least early in the game. Later in the game, you can save yourself from death occasionally, but it carries a fair amount of resource cost, and more often than not, I still preferred the quick death, as I wanted those resources for upgrades. Which, on the topic of upgrades, I'm not sure why there are items to collect and an upgrade bench here. For me, it was incredibly out of place. It's like someone said, hey, we really need to have some form of progression, and this was the answer. It's very simple, and it uses the same materials you use for crafting ammo, those throwables, and also those items that you can use to save yourself, which could have been an interesting trade-off if not for the fact that you can only carry so many of those resources. So if you recently had to craft some ammo, guess what? You probably aren't doing any upgrades when you find that workbench. Overall, I think the game would have just been better without it. Every time I found a workbench, I somewhat resented it being there. All of that said, the gameplay isn't bad. I just didn't find it to be particularly good. I couldn't find anything that made the gameplay unique or even interesting for me. For someone that really doesn't need it to be interesting in order to enjoy the story and the atmosphere, it may not really be a deal breaker. And while we're on the topic, let's talk about the atmosphere. There is an atmosphere to this game that's actually very special, which is probably what got me to finish it. I think for some, it's going to be enough to allow them to overlook the game's shortcomings. The atmosphere is dark and full of mystery. It's gritty and full of suffering that's obvious in every town and in every character interaction. Even when I felt pretty confident that I knew where this game was heading, I still wanted to see it through. I still wanted to uncover the story with this strange alternate reality and what's really going on with these characters. The atmosphere and the story may carry the game enough for some, and the rest doesn't really need to be anything special. As far as the story goes, I know it's why many people love this game, and I know I'm going to see comments telling me I'm wrong. But for me, the story was okay. I absolutely can look at it and I can see and understand why people love it. I enjoyed the relationship between Amicia and Hugo for the most part. Some of your companions that you meet along your journey were also somewhat interesting. But overall, the only thing that really stood out was that sibling relationship. The plot, for me at least, was overly predictable. The villains lacked any form of depth, and their motivations were very surface level. There were some interesting plot twists, but they were telegraphed so far out in advance that it was hard not to see them coming, which is something that I struggle with in narrative-heavy games. So again, that may be a me problem. And I think that's what's at the heart of some of my issue. It's kind of like a meal. If everything on your plate is good, then it's a good meal. If you have one really great component and the rest of it is just okay, it may still be a good meal overall, but that one great ingredient is really what's carrying the rest of your meal. And then there are other times where someone may give you a bunch of stuff that's okay, but maybe it goes really well together. Maybe it's really what you're looking for at that moment. In that case, it can still be great. For example, if you have a junk food or sweet craving and someone gives you a variety of Oreos, is there a time and place where a variety of Oreos is exactly what you're looking for? 100%. I know I've belabored the point a little bit, but the idea is, for a game like this, if most of the gameplay elements were going to be just okay, the narrative needed to be really great. And for me, it just wasn't. But for some, that story is going to be great, and this will be a good experience. For others, 13th century France may be their Oreos. It's such a unique thing in a game that may be all they need to get excited about, and that's really going to carry the game for them. And for some, maybe that relationship between Amicia and Hugo is really going to be enough to carry the game. That's really all they're going to need. However, if you need that gameplay to be good, I don't think this game is for you. One thing I will say is in a world where you can get games like this through Game Pass, Epic, Humble Bundle, if you get a chance to try this, it's worth giving a shot. But what I can tell you is that if you don't like it in the first couple hours, I think it's highly unlikely it's going to win you over. I was doing some reading before I decided to finish the game, and I saw a couple people claim that it did improve with time, but I didn't really find that to be the case. The trial and error that comes with stealth does get better, and you have more options overall later in the game, so the gameplay does get a little more interesting if the stealth is what trips it up for you, but overall the DNA of the game stays the same throughout. Alright, so if you made it this far, thanks for watching. If you liked the video, maybe click the like button, maybe subscribe, would greatly appreciate it. If you disliked the video, feel free to tell me in the comments. What did you think of the Plague Tale? Are you thinking of playing it yourself? Is it in your backlog? Have you already played it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Let me know in the comments. So the next game of the series is going to be Oxenfree. I'm going for something a little different. I'm also going to try to do something kind of short, because the next game after that is likely to be Dragon's Dogma. So I'm trying to get something a little shorter before I dig into something that's a whole lot longer. Is Oxenfree on your backlog? Have you already played it? Is it good? Bad? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one.